Well, it is a pleasure for me to introduce to all of you my friend, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney. He and I have known each other for quite some time, back when he was at the early stages of launching what is called the Folds of Honor Foundation. And his story goes so much deeper than that charitable cause. And I'm so happy to talk with him and talk with all of you about his new book called Fly Into the Wind, because we're going to talk leadership, we're going to talk overcoming fear, we're going to talk faith, and roll all of those things into a really inspiring conversation, I have no doubt. So with that, Dan Rooney, how are you, sir?
I am blessed. Bill, thanks for having me. And we've been on this journey a long time together. And you know, God continues to evolve it in extraordinary ways. And so I'm honored and humbled to be able to share a little bit of my walk with the audience today. Well,
let me give the audience a bit of background on Lieutenant Colonel Dan Noonan Rooney. He's a fighter pilot with 3 combat tours in Iraq, a PGA professional, the founder of Folds of Honor. He's won so many awards. I don't want to take the time to run all through them. Just know that some of the praise coming in for the book, Fly Into the Wind, comes from Danica Patrick, and from Jim Nance, from Jack Nicklaus, from George W. Bush, and on the list goes. So since growing up in Grand Haven, Michigan, you've been rubbing shoulders with some folks over the last few years.
Yeah, you know, it's I said it's providence, where God takes you on this journey, and you know, so much of this has come from our walk at Folds of Honor, and you know, that mission started above our garage 13 years ago. I live in Oklahoma now, and we've awarded now 28,000 scholarships to spouses and children who've had someone killed or disabled. It's about $130 million out the door. And on this journey, you know, it's transcended the game of golf, but it started in the game of golf. I've had the opportunity to just meet so many incredible people on the walk that I never would have, just as a fighter pilot and a PGA club pro. And so I like to think it's one of those things. You do good, and good things happen. And there's a spirit that connects this Folds of Honor ministry to so many people, and just this amazing irony that when you're helping someone, when you reach out to help someone, that you're actually the one being helped. And it's this awesome bridge that we give people, whether you're a rank and file, individual, or you're in the military, or you're a former president. I think we're all human beings, and we need that in our heart.
As we sit here at this stage of 2020, you and I are speaking just a couple days before Election Day. Our audience will hear this for the most part after that. As we sit here thinking through where this country is right now, I've been trying to make the point that there are still a lot of people with kind, compassionate, generous, friendly hearts to them, even though they don't make it onto the evening news. Your book, Fly Into the Wind, talks about harnessing faith and fearlessness on your ascent to greatness. So let me kind of throw a softball out at you to start. Is this still a great nation?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I would say I think it's 98% of the people in this country are just as normal as they've always been, right? Borrow a cup of sugar from your neighbor, wave at someone going down the street, and we unfortunately are polarized by the media on both sides. I've no doubt. I think that Washington, as a general rule, does a really poor job of representing the American spirit. And with the election coming up, I know God's got a plan, but I personally think people put way too much stock in the person that sits in that chair, right? On Wednesday morning, you and I are going to get up. We're going to be good, God-fearing human beings. We're going to go to work. We're going to take care of our families and our friends. And it just is, it just seems so, there's so much emotional investment that people make in this, and not saying it's not important, but it just doesn't have that, direct impact, I think, that people give it stock in our day-to-day lives. And so, one of them's going to get elected, and we're going to wake up the next day, and I'm going to be a proud American, just like I was the day before. And we'll keep on keeping on, because that's what we do.
Yeah, I don't know when it was that we lost that perspective, and we lost track of the reality that loving our families and our neighbors, as Scripture commands us, is really what is most important through all of this. But it does seem like that sort of slipped into the ether of the 24/7 cable breaking news every minute of the day kind of a world. And I knew that you still had great optimism in this great nation. And as you sat down to sort of put your encouraging and inspiring thoughts into written form, I have to think that was a bit of a Herculean task.
Yeah, I mean, writing a book, like the title, is flying into the wind, especially, when you feel a true calling to share something that, in my heart, I think is going to impact thousands of people in a positive way. Just the journey of, taking, my thoughts and the way I live my life and putting them putting them down on paper and understanding, just the consequence of getting it right. Because that's when I wrote this, that was the lens I was looking at. It's like when I put this on paper, putting everything I have into it because people's lives are so important, and making sure that you give them something that's going to make a difference in their life. And I always said that, the greatest books I've ever read, and this is the standard that I hold flying to the wind, and we'll unpack that here in a second, and I probably have 15 books in my life that have had this impact, that I've taken one thing out of them that are with me every day of my life, right? These, like, the greatest books, you pull one thing out that changes your life forever, and you take it with you every day. And that is my hope and prayer for flying to the wind. And I think there are multiple opportunities for this to happen based on where you are in your life. But this will be something that changes people's lives, in a positive way, based on the lessons that I've learned and distilled into the pages of this book.
So little Danny Rooney is different than, I almost said old man Danny Rooney. That's not what I meant to say, but the current edition of Dan Rooney. How different, how fearful, for instance, was a young Dan Rooney? Were you the kid who was jumping off of the roof or off of the tree limbs and into the pool and fearless in every way, or did that develop as you began getting into things like military service?
Yeah, so if fear is interesting, it manifests itself in different ways. So I was reckless. There's no doubt about it. All right, and I always joke. So I'm fortunate to play quite a bit of golf with President Bush 43, and I had a problem as a young man. I would vandalize things, right? Not bad, but I would blow up mailboxes with M60s. I shot out a couple windows with my BB gun and got caught a few times. But I mean, I had this energy in me all the time that I had to do something with, and I love this realm between fear and faith of like getting caught. And I joke with President Bush, and I said, now you made me a fighter pilot. I'm a hero, and I break things at epic proportions now, right?
Right.
And but I put that energy in the right place. So I wasn't afraid. Yes, they knew me by name in the emergency room, because I got so many stitches and I broke so many bones. But what I've always been afraid of, and I still am, and I've harnessed it, and I think in a positive way, is fear of failure. And that's all. As a kid, that was my greatest fear was messing up, right? And not doing well in a basketball game or playing poorly in golf. And as you get older, that fear of failure can be, and at times in my life, it was a little debilitating. But there's an energy force that comes with that. And to be able to repurpose and redirect that and harness that in a positive way to motivate you, is a very common thread. And, not to digress here or get off on a tangent, but I got a master's in sports psychology. And you look at the great ones, the DNA of the Michael Jordans and the Larry Birds and the Magic Johnsons and, Jack Nicklaus's. There's a fear of failure that drives people. And if you can harness it, it can be really healthy.
Well, and harnessing that fear is what so many adults, actually, so many people of all ages are striving after to get a handle on it. That's why we buy so many self-help books or go to counseling or try
Yeah.
all of these different measures. And we also know that while there may be different routes to the solution, one of the common threads to overcoming fear is placing your fears in the hands of the Almighty, because that is the ultimate guide and comfort through times of fear. So as we start to dig into Fly into the Wind, how did you learn to kind of harness your faith and let that play a role in overcoming fear?
Yeah. So as we dig into the book, right? We would say as fighter pilots, we always take off into the wind, and it's flying the most powerful jet in the world, but we still need resistance in order to ascend. And our lives are no different. And I wrote this book during a 10-year period of a personal life storm, right? But details don't matter for our discussions here. But in this storm, in this, kind of period of suffering in my life, I learned so many lessons, was so introspective. And I came out of it a completely different person, which is a story that's written through history, right? So often, I mean, the brightest lights come from the darkest places. But I felt a calling from God to put this down on paper, to share the blessings. And during the storm, I would have never called them blessings, but looking back, you understand, how the divine vector of your life helps you evolve to hopefully answer the final question when the lights go out. Hey, did you use your talents? Were you humble? Were you committed to me above all else? So, I go through this 10-year storm, and 10 years, I promise all of us will wake up 10 years from now and say, where did the time go? Right? This time warp that we're all living in. I promise, in the books that I've outlined a code of living, that if you implement this code of living and put your own nuance on it, that you'll be able to answer that question. Where did that time go? And if you unpack that statement even a little bit more, as fighter pilots, I think we have a few skills, but one that we're the best in the world at, and it's a prerequisite to become a fighter pilot, is we can manage copious amounts of information in 3 dimensions, and the 4th dimension is time, going twice the speed of sound. And what we're able to do is prioritize. So take it all in and prioritize, and you look at modern life, and that's it for all of us, right? You were drinking through the fire hose, every one of us. We're connected, we're overscheduled. I talk to people all the time, and the answer is always I'm so busy. And you hate to see people like I get this sense like I survived the day, right? And that is not acceptable. But if you're not intentional about your life, it'll run you. I mean, it absolutely will. I mean, like a machine gun of stuff coming at you. And the code of living in this book is about this, like, prioritizing this unconditional pursuit of being your best self, and not to be confused with being happy. I mean, I think that is the biggest load of crap. And we're indoctrinated as a kid. If I was going to go back to my parents, the only thing I didn't like about my parents, and I try not to do it with my kids, to say, well, why aren't you happy? Doesn't this make you happy? You should just be happy. That should be the goal. Happiness is an emotion that is fleeting at best, right? We just wake up some days and you're just not happy, right? But it's okay. Our emotions come and go. This book is about engineering a life of fulfillment. And I spell fulfillment F-U-L-L, full. And that's because what are you filling yourself up with? And this code of living is designed just to make sure that you're filling yourself up the right way. So kind of a fun fighter pilot is for me, when I was during this life storm and created this code of living, because there was so much chaos in my life. that was out of control, problems I couldn't solve. I needed to control, like hyper focus on the stuff I could control on a day-to-day basis. And there's a term as we use as fighter pilots, is an acronym called CAVU.
And
Stands for
I want to dive into that here in just a moment. Let me take a quick break.
Yep.
We'll come back and we'll dig further into what that means, because that's a really important concept, and I don't want to cut it short. Back in a minute with more of the Big Impact. Our guest on the Big Impact is Lt Col Dan Rooney, longtime friend, a gentleman who had an idea years ago that started small. It started with a donation box on the counter of a golf course pro shop, with an effort to raise money for the families of fallen heroes. Now, all these years later, the Folds of Honor Foundation has donated over $135, I believe, million in scholarships, including, and I don't think I've told you this, Dan, but including about 6 houses down from my home, a widow who had never heard of Folds of Honor. And when I mentioned it to her, she decided to investigate it, and without really any difficulty, and just a little bit later, she had tears in her eyes as she told the story of her 6 children being given education scholarships from Folds of Honor. So it's very real. Also very real is what you alluded to a few minutes ago, and kind of passed by, and I understand why. You talked about a 10-year storm in your life. And to the degree that you're okay and comfortable, I would love to have you just kind of touch on what that meant, and here's why. Quite often on this program, we bring in folks who have had remarkable journeys of overcoming obstacles, challenges, and I can't even begin to tell you how many listeners have reached out and said, man, I thought I was all alone in that. I thought I was the only one who ever faced fill in the blank. And they will say it did my heart such good to know that there was somebody else who had encountered that level of challenge in their life. So like I said, if you're comfortable, if you could kind of peel back a little bit of what the 10-year storm looked like, I think it helps really set up the predicate for getting into fly into the wind, because you're overcoming those things.
Yeah, and I always hesitate. It's myopic, I think, to share your own struggles, and we as individuals, you can't help but you look at other people and say, wow, there are way worse struggles out there, right? You don't want people to judge your struggle. I'll give you the 30,000 foot view of mine. I have no problem sharing, but it started with a near tragic mishap in the F-16 for me, seconds between life and death. And it was this, ominous trigger of what had been really a storybook run for me, right? I was a great college golfer, played against Tiger Woods, married my college sweetheart, run the gauntlet, become a fighter pilot, make it through this training, and every PGA Club Pro, every dream I had chased, I had caught, right? And you start believing at some point along the way that you have something to do with that, right? I get up early, I work hard, I'm all this. And I would say that, my storm specifically, looking at, if I was reading God's intention on this, it was to level set me and to make me know I got nothing to do with anything, right? I'm a broken vessel, and that's the highest and best use and the place I am now. And, I went through, pending bankruptcy. We built a project here in Tulsa called the Patriot in 2008, and woke up every day of my life for about 6 years going bankrupt. The Folds of Honor, which is, flying high as the Patriot is now, was teetering, on the brink based on, some mistakes I'd made, sins of omission rather than, commission, having people that you thought you could count on, stab you in the back.
The learning process, right? The learning process that people are deeply imperfect.
Right. That was, I would say at some level counting too much on other people. And it spiraled for me into this, deep kind of dark depression. I was, struggling. It was hard on my family. It was hard on my marriage. it really, I mean, just like sucked the happiness out of my life. And it culminated for me. One of the worst days of my entire life was, I walked in and quit being a fighter pilot. And I had, three things in play. It was, hey, I got to save my house, which translates into, we got to make the Patriot work. The golf course here in Tulsa, Folds of Honor's going to implode on itself and the families that we support. And I can't keep being a fighter pilot and pull this off. And so it was the worst day. The bottom of my pit was turning my back on my boyhood dream. There's parts of me, I wish I could maybe go back and undo that decision, but you can't. And I got a mulligan. Thankfully, I'm flying at Eglin Air Force Base now and in the aggressor squadron. Those are the details of my life. And I always say there's so much worse, right? I got my health. I got all those things that really matter, but it was a dark struggle. And kind of to jump back where we had left off is this, in my struggle, creating CAVU. And that was like, okay, I got all these things, these problems, and I'm not going to fix at the end of the day. And that's hard for us as humans, right? We want to fix problems now, right? We want them over. We want a nice bow on it. We want to move to tomorrow and get this thing fixed. And it was like, this ain't getting fixed overnight. And I did not know, thank God, it was going to last 10 years. But during this time, I created my own little bubble. And I called it, CAVU, this chaos going on around me. But I built a daily code of living that is comprised of 10 LOEs. We call them lines of effort in the military. But it was like, I can execute this regardless of what's going on. And I actually would harness a lot of this negative energy and be, that much more methodical. It's like, I will win the day in God's eyes, right? I'm going to do everything I can in my control to be the best person, knowing I have no control over the outcome. And when you look at the cover of the book, was so intentional, Fly into the Wind. And I mean, it's stunning. Yeah. And HarperCollins, who's the publisher of this, they're the oldest, biggest publisher in the country. And they said, this may be the prettiest cover we've ever seen. But when I see it, it's this orange, and it's the clouds that are silhouetted behind with the F-16 out in front. And it's like your heart's on fire, right? This book is about hope. And regardless if you're like me and, are in a period of suffering in your life, or you're crushing it, your daily routine doesn't change. And that's what I figured out, right? And we put so much weight on what's going on, and it's so easy to make an excuse not to do this because this is happening in my life.
Well, let me back up for a moment. And you heard Lieutenant Colonel Rooney mention the acronym CAVU, C-A-V-U. That stands for Ceiling and Visibility Unlimited. Obviously, that's a pilot-related term. And from that, he leads into, in the book, Into the Wind, he leads into kind of the cores of the foundation upon which you build your confidence and you overcome fear, and you understand that there is a pathway to greatness. And I think, Danny, one of the things that I really appreciate you saying a couple minutes ago is that early on you thought that all of the pathway to greatness was your doing. Whenever we hit home runs, all of us people, whenever we accomplish something successfully, the temptation is to kind of look around and go, hey, I did it. I did it. I made it work. They couldn't do it without me, kind of a thing, right? Mm-hmm. I'm reminded of a couple of interesting examples that come from very different sources. So one, I'm reminded of the story of Jonah, who, when he was instructed by the Lord to go into Nineveh, said, I'm not going there, and went and tried to hide repeatedly, and it didn't work so well for him. And I always, as a young boy, I was like, why didn't God just pick somebody else? Because he wanted to work through an imperfect coward named Jonah. And then the other really opposite end of the extreme example is that here in my studio on this wall right over here, I have the framed front page of the Detroit Free Press on the day Ernie Harwell, the legendary Detroit Tigers announcer, was fired. And I've kept that here to remind me that all of us are indispensable. Or, no, I should say dispensable.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and so anytime we get this inflated sense of self-worth that nothing could happen without us, life has a way of bringing us back to reality. And I think you were describing some of that earlier. So now what I love to do is I love to explore what we would consider the kind of the after picture, right? So that was the before picture. And now this book tells the story of the after picture. Not that it's completed, but it's certainly headed in a much more positive direction. We'll dig into some of those after effects here in a moment as we continue on The Big Impact with Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney after this. We've got a few minutes left on The Big Impact with Dan Rooney, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney. And again, his book is called Fly Into the Wind, and it's soon to be a TV show on Fox Nation, which has got to be pretty darn exciting. And I mentioned at the outset some of the praise that's come in for the book. Former President George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, Sean Hannity, U.S. Open champion Gary Woodland, racing star Danica Patrick, announcer, CBS broadcaster Jim Nance, Jack Nicklaus, the GOAT, the greatest of all time, who we just spent a little bit of time with at your project in the west side of Michigan. So with all that praise coming in, obviously you've worked awfully hard to deliver a powerful and big impact in this book. What is it that you most want readers to take away from it?
Well, we alluded to it earlier, and I said this book for me is a tremendous success, but falls into the category of, 15 books that I've read in my life that a reader takes one thing away from that changes them forever, every day from this moment forward. And I really believe in my heart there are multiple places in this book that can happen. When you look at the book, I describe it as more of a journey, not necessarily just a read. And we have this saying as fighter pilots that you have to slow down in order to speed up. And it's a perfect analogy for the reader's journey with Fly Into the Wind. And I describe, I got 10 lines of effort in the book, and it is a blueprint to what I think is about finding fulfillment, not success, not greatness. Those are all defined in various ways, but finding fulfillment and my code of living based on, what's the life God wants you to live, and how are you going to live true to that? But along the way, catch your big dreams, right? Get through your life storms. And
you have one on this list, Dan, that fascinates me, that I think would be a game changer for an awful lot of people, and that is go before you're ready. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, and that's the very last one, right? So it's the very last one. Can I answer that one in a second?
You sure can.
Because I am a chronological person as a fighter pilot brain. And so the first line of effort is a word that most people have never heard before. It's called quintessence. And Aristotle dubbed this the fifth element. And one of the few places that science, religion, the early philosophers agree, it sounds a little corny, but it's like Star Wars, the Force in Star Wars, that we can only see 10% of what is here, but we are certain the other 90% is there. And it's the essence that ties everything together. And it's that voice in our heart. I firmly believe in the first line of effort requires you to be incredibly honest with yourself. And like, where am I? Where do I want to go? Is my life aligned with God's intended path? And one of the things I've been able to do in my life is place no limits on what's possible. Don't listen to the experts that tell you that'll never work. It can't be done. They're all around us. Learning to shut that off and be quiet, but be honest with yourself and where am I and where do I want to go? And it's interesting because it ties back this first LOE to the end of our lives. And the number one regret on people's deathbed is, I wish I would have lived a life true to myself, not the life that others expected of me. And can you look yourself in the mirror and really answer that? We all have obligations, right? I'm not saying throw all it out the window, but really being true to yourself is where this book starts. And if you can't get there, it's like, don't bother reading the other 12 chapters. It's because the other 12 chapters are, hey, if you identify your target, where you want to go, it is going to start evolving in powerful ways.
The mirror is an awfully tough place to look.
Yeah,
right.
My buddy, it is, and my buddy Greg Norman, who's in the Fox show. He's an episode on this Fox show, and he said he looks with those blue eyes at himself in the mirror. I mean, truly looking at yourself in the mirror. So there's power, right? We lie to ourselves more than anybody else.
Well, and we've become a nation that is very gifted at pointing out the flaws in other people. We're really good at that.
Makes us feel good sometimes in a sick way.
It does, and especially during a political season, all you ever really see from a public media standpoint is fingers pointing at everybody else. You don't really ever see them, pointing back in the direction of the speaker. It's always what that person's doing wrong, how bad they would be for this particular office. And I would be thrilled to have somebody rise above that and instead call out the greatness that awaits within people who are kind to each other, who act with grace, who act with, they practice the golden rule. They treat other people like they would like to be treated. We don't see a lot of that. And as you dig into that first little thought in the book, quintessence, if I'm really going to be serious about changing the pathway of my life for the better, by definition, that has to start within me. Am I going to pursue this from a standpoint of fixing myself instead of blaming everybody else?
And so one of the things I talk about, and I love that statement, is, we are connected by God, right? And the true path to bringing people together starts with making yourself better. And the accountability and the opportunities that come from that place. I couldn't agree more.
Parasitic drag. You're introducing me to some unique terminology in this book. What on earth is parasitic drag?
Yeah, one of my favorites. And again, this is honest conversation with yourself. And I went through this during my storm in a big way. So parasitic drag, it's a fighter pilot term again, but on October 14th, 1947, Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier. And before they broke the sound barrier, they kept running into this wall. They could not get past the Mach. And they had to modify the Bell X-1, which was the airplane he was flying, and the tail design, and it had parasitic drag, right? So there was too much drag in order to break through the sound barrier. So take this concept to our lives. And where are you and where do you want to get to, right? And in order to do that, you've got to systematically inventory your life and look at your parasitic drag and start eliminating it. There is stuff that holds us back every day, and it manifests itself different way. It can be the relationships in your life. It can be alcohol, right? It can be weight. It could be our egos. When we talked about it, it's a huge parasitic drag. Jack Nicklaus talks about this in the book, that was his big parasitic drag as a young golfer, his ego. And he got past that is when he truly blew it wide open. But we've talked about religion, and I'll be done with parasitic drag, but I love this, is I think the number one parasitic drag in all of our lives is anger and resentment toward somebody else or a situation in your life or yourself. And forgiveness is the number one thing, right? To eliminate parasitic drag, you got to forgive, and it starts with you, and then it inventories out in your life, and you've got to let it go. And so interesting because it's a Christian principle, but it goes throughout all religions, and it is like the number one tenet. If in the Jewish religion, they call it a mitzvah, which is like the divine command of Judaism. You forgive, right? You look at the Muslim faith, right? I spent a lot of time fighting the war in Iraq, but Allah is translated as the partner. And I think one of my favorites, and it's a quote from Gandhi. I'll try to get it right when he talks about forgiveness. Is the weak can never forgive, but forgiveness is the attribute of a strong person. And you gotta let go of this stuff, because it's like holding on to the hot coal, gonna throw it at somebody else. You're the one that gets burned with this anger and resentment that you hold, and then going through your life and getting rid of the other crap that holds you back, right?
Yeah.
And
how many times have we attended a funeral where you will see maybe a sibling of the deceased who has nothing but bitterness and maybe doesn't attend, but if they do, you kind of wish they had not. And it's one of the saddest things to ever see, is when somebody carries that hot coal with them for decades instead of taking the sometimes awkward steps of making it right and coming back together again. So I'm really glad you dealt with that one. One more before we go, and this ties us back into earlier. Go before you're ready. I love this one.
Oh yeah, so it's the last one. It is it's what sets off your life. It's the culmination of the book, and I look at it's a defiant thread of DNA that bonds greatness together. And I tell a story in the book about, you get 4 rides in an F-16 with an instructor. Your 5th ride is solo. Some $45 million fighter jet, you know what half the buttons do. But you go or you wash out of the program. So I go and fly this jet. I would have never gone if it was up to me. But I go, I fly the F-16, I land, and that's when this concept hit me the first time. And it was like this reckless faith, go before you're ready. And extraordinary things happen in life. But as you start looking at true greatness, this is the common bond. These are these rare individuals that have the faith to go, right? I'm not ready, but I'm going. And so often in life, we're our own worst enemy, right? We hold ourselves back. Well, I'm gonna go get a different job when I have this much money in the bank. I'm gonna do this when this is done, or in a couple years, this is my goal. Hey man, tomorrow is guaranteed to no one. And life is incredibly short, as we've talked about. Go before you're ready. And you go back to these things that, like, if you get one thing out of the book, this is the one that people are just grabbing onto like crazy. That's like, oh my gosh, you're right. And in the book, it's really cool because I tie together some extraordinary examples of some of my life heroes that I know, some that I don't, that have gone before they're ready. And this can change everything, but it's in order. And the magic in this book as we close is each one of these 10 lines of effort, they build on each other, and you have to take them in order, but they will prepare you for that moment. Are you going to go? Are you not going to go? And that is ultimately the power of volition, the power of choice that we all are given by God, and this free will on this wonderful journey of life. But if you want to be great, you got to go before you're ready. And I do it almost every single day.
Do you have a feel for when the TV version of Fly Into the Wind will be out?
I have better than a feel. I know. So November 10th, it comes out. First episode is with my dear brother, David Faraday. Nice. And the first time he's ever really told his story of flying into the wind to a camera. Wow. And it's one of the most powerful pieces of journalism I've ever seen in my life. And the whole concept of the show, just like the book, is, hey, we all struggle. And I'm able to sit down with some heroically famous people and in my 5 episodes I've done, the one thing I pulled away from it is, if you know someone that has achieved greatness, I promise they have a polarizing experience, and they've had a challenge that's equally as great in their life. And, you know, they sit down, Urban Meyer, Dara Torres, Herschel Walker, Greg Norman, and it's going to help a lot of people. And that's the motivation for everything we're doing, whether it's Folds of Honor, whether it's Fly Into the Wind, the book, the TV show. And I just hope people will go out and, you know, order a copy of the book. And you can pre-order at my website, danrooney.com. It'll link you to Barnes and Noble, Amazon, all the usual folks. It's going to be in Walmart and Sam's Club, but it drops November 17th. And we really hope that people will pick up a copy and pick up a few copies for people they love, because it's going to help.
Well, I don't know if you knew this, but it's also just in time for the holidays.
It is. And
what a coincidence.
And probably the thing I'm most passionate about. So I read the audio version of the book.
Oh, did you? Okay.
And when I really get to share, right, when it's my voice. And so the audio version is out there as well. But and I think we all need something to be hopeful for right now, right?
I agree.
And it is a tough season for all of us, but God has a plan.
Amen. Well, I'm glad you and I finally got to have a conversation outside of the golf world. It's good to hear what kind of drives your passion, and I'm glad you were able to capture it in written form. So some people are watching us doing the live stream conversation. More people will be listening to us in podcast form or on the radio for the Big Impact program. So I'll put a link to the book, Fly Into the Wind, on the podcast notes. You can also go to danrooney.com to get it, and it will lead you to all of the other marketplaces out there. You know, books are everywhere except in actual stores these days, so you can get it in a million different ways. And Danny, nothing but the best to you and the family during the holidays, and I can't wait to see you again, probably in the spring, when a ribbon is cut at a very special golf property in West Michigan. So that's going to be exciting.
Yeah. That's in the book too, the American Dunes journey. Man, you talk about a fly into the wind journey. So yeah, May 1st and May 2nd, we'll be up in Grand Haven with Mr. Nicholas, and so many blessings. And, you know, God bless you for letting me share what's on my heart. And I just pray that it helps a lot of people.